Late on the night of March 8, 2026, ballistic missiles were launched from Iranian territory toward the industrial coastline of northern Haifa. Their target was the Bazan Group refinery complex in Haifa Bay, the largest oil processing facility in the country. If that facility were disabled for an extended period, more than half of Israel's domestic fuel supply could be disrupted within days. The strike immediately raised a larger strategic question. Was this a limited retaliation, or the opening stage of a wider conflict targeting the energy systems that keep modern states functioning? Iranian state media confirmed the attack within minutes. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps also released statements acknowledging responsibility for the strike. The timing was deliberate. Hours earlier, Israeli aircraft had struck fuel storage facilities near Tehran for the first time during the conflict. Fires at those depots spread rapidly, and video recorded in surrounding neighborhoods showed thick smoke columns rising across the capital. For Iranian leadership, the logic was straightforward. If energy infrastructure became a target inside Iran, similar facilities inside Israel would become legitimate military objectives. The weapon selected for the strike was the Kheibar Shekan missile. This system belongs to a newer generation of Iranian ballistic missiles designed for rapid deployment and mobility. Unlike earlier models that depended on liquid propellants, the Kheibar Shekan uses solid fuel. That distinction changes how the weapon can be used in combat. Liquid-fueled missiles often require hours of preparation on exposed launch sites, while propellant is loaded into the vehicle. Solid fuel systems can remain fully assembled and ready to fire for extended periods. Once a launch order is given, the missile can leave its launcher within minutes. This difference matters because of how missile launchers are now deployed. Iranian forces frequently mount these weapons on large truck platforms that resemble ordinary cargo vehicles. From satellite imagery alone, distinguishing a missile transporter from a civilian freight truck becomes extremely difficult. The result is a mobile launch network that can disperse across highways, industrial zones, or storage facilities, making preemptive destruction far more complicated. That mobility is one reason Iran has sustained repeated missile launches throughout the conflict. The Kheibar Shekan itself measures roughly 11 meters in length, with a launch weight between 4 and 6 metric tons. Its warhead carries approximately 550 kilograms of high explosive. Publicly available estimates place its operational range at around 1,450 kilometers, a distance that allows launches from western Iran to reach most Israeli territory. Some analysts believe a modified variant may extend that range closer to 1,800 kilometers. But the most important feature is not distance. It is survivability before launch. Missile systems are only effective if they can survive long enough to be used. In earlier decades, fixed launch sites were vulnerable to surveillance satellites, drones, and electronic intelligence. Once detected, they could be targeted before firing. Mobile launch systems change that equation. They reduce the time between detection and launch to such a narrow window that interception before firing becomes unlikely. This capability is central to Iran's current missile strategy. The warhead itself uses a maneuverable re-entry vehicle design. During the final stage of flight, small guidance adjustments allow the missile to refine its trajectory toward the intended target. Terminal speed estimates vary widely. Some analysts suggest final velocities around Mach 3, while others believe the missile may approach hypersonic ranges closer to Mach 7 or higher during descent. The uncertainty surrounding these numbers creates planning difficulties for defensive systems attempting to calculate intercept points. The intended target was the refinery complex operated by the Bazan Group in Haifa Bay. The site covers more than 500 acres and sits only a few kilometers from densely populated residential districts. This facility processes imported crude oil and supplies between 50 and 60% of Israel's refined fuel. Diesel, gasoline, jet fuel, and liquefied petroleum gas all move through the refinery's processing units before entering national distribution networks. If operations at the site are halted, the country's fuel supply chain immediately faces strain. Israel maintains a second refinery in Ashdod, but that facility processes significantly smaller volumes of crude oil. Its capacity alone cannot replace the output produced in Haifa. At the time of the strike, Israeli energy infrastructure was already under pressure. Offshore natural gas fields such as Leviathan gas field had been temporarily shut down as a precaution following the outbreak of hostilities. With gas production paused, refined petroleum products became even more important to maintain transportation, electricity generation, and industrial activity. This was not the first time the Haifa refinery had been targeted. In mid-2025, during a previous escalation, missiles struck the same complex and caused significant damage to its internal power systems. That earlier incident forced the facility to suspend operations while repairs were carried out. The disruption lasted weeks and exposed the vulnerability of Israel's concentrated refining capacity. The March 2026 strike therefore targeted infrastructure that had already demonstrated its sensitivity to attack. Energy infrastructure has increasingly become a focal point of modern conflict because it links military capability with economic stability. Aircraft require refined jet fuel. Military logistics depend on diesel. Civilian transportation and electricity production also rely heavily on petroleum products. When these supply chains are disrupted, both military operations and domestic economies begin to feel the effects. The refinery strike did not occur in isolation. It was one element in a broader escalation that began days earlier when the United States and Israel conducted coordinated attacks on Iranian targets across multiple provinces. Hundreds of sites were struck during the opening phase of that operation. Military installations, command centers, and logistical infrastructure were among the reported targets. Those attacks triggered a large-scale Iranian response involving missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles directed at both Israeli and American assets in the region. Within the first week of the conflict, Iranian forces claimed to have launched hundreds of missiles and thousands of drones. A portion of these attacks focused on Israeli cities such as Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Others targeted American military facilities across the Middle East, including bases in Qatar, Bahrain, and the United States Fifth Fleet headquarters. This widening set of targets suggested the conflict was evolving beyond a bilateral confrontation. The global implications became most visible around the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow maritime corridor connects the Persian Gulf to international shipping lanes. Roughly 20 million barrels of oil pass through the strait each day, representing close to 1/5 of global petroleum consumption. When Iranian commanders announced restrictions on transit for ships linked to Western countries, commercial traffic declined rapidly. Tankers began waiting outside the strait rather than attempting passage. Shipping data showed dozens of vessels anchored in surrounding waters as insurers reassessed the risks of entering the corridor. Only a small number of ships continued transit, primarily those associated with countries maintaining neutral or cooperative relations with Iran. Because the strait handles such a large portion of global oil trade, even partial disruption can affect energy markets worldwide. Within days, oil prices reacted sharply. International benchmarks climbed from roughly $70 per barrel before the conflict to more than $100 as traders anticipated supply shortages. Natural gas markets also responded. Liquefied natural gas exports from Qatar, one of the world's largest suppliers, were suspended after security concerns emerged around regional shipping routes. These disruptions extended the conflict's impact far beyond the Middle East. A second turning point occurred when Iran's political leadership stabilized despite the assassination of Ali Khamenei during the early phase of the war. Within days, the Assembly of Experts appointed his son Mojtaba Khamenei as successor. For outside observers who expected political collapse, the rapid transfer of authority signaled that Iran's governing structure remained intact. Meanwhile, the pace of missile launches fluctuated throughout the conflict. Early assessments suggested that Iran's stockpiles might be limited. However, later waves of attacks included a wider range of systems, including the Fatah hypersonic missile and the Khorramshahr missile. The diversity of weapons indicated that Iran retained significant missile reserves. Each new strike added pressure to an already fragile regional environment. Energy facilities, shipping routes, and military bases were now interconnected targets within a single conflict system. Damage to any one of these elements could ripple outward through fuel markets, military supply lines, and civilian economies. The refinery strike in Haifa therefore represented more than a tactical exchange. It highlighted how energy infrastructure had become central to the strategic calculations of both sides. By early March, several realities had become clear. Missile exchanges between Iran and Israel were continuing without pause. Oil and gas infrastructure across the Gulf region faced increasing risk. And international energy markets were already reacting to potential supply disruptions. These developments suggested that the conflict had moved beyond isolated military strikes and into a broader contest over the systems that sustain modern economies. The strategic balance has therefore shifted in several ways. Iran demonstrated that its mobile missile network can sustain repeated attacks despite heavy bombardment. Israel and its allies revealed that energy infrastructure is now considered a legitimate target in retaliation. At the same time, global markets responded immediately to the possibility of prolonged disruption in one of the world's most critical energy corridors. Taken together, these changes illustrate how modern warfare increasingly targets interconnected systems rather than individual battlefields. Fuel production, shipping routes, and missile capabilities are now part of the same strategic equation. The strike on the Haifa refinery did not end the conflict, but it showed how quickly a regional confrontation can expand into a crisis with global economic consequences.